Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ryan. I'm the DM for our group in Dungeons & Dragons. Now, getting into D&D can be a bit of a challenge since the barrier to entry includes filling out a character sheet, finding a DM and a party, coordinating with your party members about your roles and backgrounds, etc., etc. The last thing you want to do as a beginner is choose a highly technical class to play by mistake and thereby add to your already intensifying state of perpetual confusion. So, if you're relatively new to D&D, what classes would be the best choices for a beginner that would be approachable and easy to learn? Well, that's the whole point of this video. So let's break it down, and I'll ultimately make 3 primary recommendations for new players and then 1 honorable mention. So let's dive in. The standard version of Dungeons & Dragons has 12 main classes, and then each of those 12 has their own subclasses that you can branch off into, thereby increasing the uniqueness of your character. Now, interestingly enough, the player handbook on page 33 of the most recent edition, per the posting date of this video, it actually lists out all of the classes and includes a column that explicitly states the difficulty level of that class. So they range from low difficulty to average, to high difficulty. I more or less agree with this table, but it's not very nuanced, right? It's pretty simplistic. They put the Warlock in the high difficulty tier, and I'm not sure that I personally agree with that. Warlock was actually my first class that I ever played, and I found it to be pretty approachable. But take that with a grain of salt, as I had already played some tangential games to D&D. But at the very least, I do in fact agree with their 2 selections for low difficulty. That being said, I do want to take a moment to specify that there is no direct correlation between difficulty and fun. A class might be labeled as easy to play, but that doesn't make it any less fun than the alternatives. And conversely, a high difficulty class isn't inherently better or more useful to your party than an easier class to play. So, don't fall into the trap of drawing a line directly from difficulty to degree of fun. They aren't related. So let's get to making recommendations one at a time here. Like I mentioned, I have 3 classes that I think are the best choices for beginners, with a 4th honorable mention. Let's kick things off with the first class, the Rogue. Yeah, this one's for all you sneaky boys and girls out there. If you like stealth and subterfuge, then the Rogue is your pick. One of the reasons it's an easy pick for a beginner is because rogues are relatively easy to both play in combat and to roleplay. You have very clear strengths and weaknesses. Your job is to stick to the perimeters, remain unseen, get sneak attacks, and then outside of combat, you're the one picking the locks and gathering intel by rolling stealth checks and then eavesdropping on private conversations. The power fantasy here is very direct. Let me talk a bit about what you do as a rogue. Your strengths are in the use of light armor, so you can move silently and quickly. You have exceptional body control, meaning you're very good with your hands and with acrobatics. You're nimble like a kitty cat. You always land on your feet. You are talented with a bow, but you might be more useful with daggers or a short sword, getting in and doing one very, very lethal attack, rather than a barbarian who might perform 3 brute attacks. You strike decisively with an accurate attack. But then you immediately at level 2, you gain the ability to double your movement distance in a single turn, to disengage from enemies, and to hide in the shadows without using a full action to do so. The rogue gets to do those things as a bonus action instead. That means you can run in, stab someone in the throat, and then run out all in one turn, where another class would maybe only be able to get in there and make an attack and then stay to receive some punishment before their next turn. But also worth noting, at level 1, rogues get immediate access to expertise, which allows them to double their proficiency bonus to skill checks that they make in areas where they are proficient. So at level 1, you might very well be able to roll the dice to pick a lock, and maybe you roll a 10. But then you get to add your modifier of +2, but then you get to add your proficiency bonus of +2, but then you get to double that proficiency bonus, so it's actually a +4. So you actually rolled a 16 instead of a 10. That's huge. So you can see how a rogue would be very useful to your team while also not being overly complex. That's why the rogue makes the list today. Let's move on to the second recommendation for beginners. Next up is the fighter class. Again, pretty straightforward. You are good at essentially one thing. and that's fighting people. Yeah, very complicated. Instead of just one attack, you'll ultimately end up with 4 total attacks per turn. You just want to hit stuff with weapons, but weapons also have mastery benefits, where if your character has mastered a weapon, then they can do things with that same weapon that other people can't do, like knocking enemies over on hit, for example, or making them weak to subsequent attacks, or slowing them down so that they can't move as far. These are things that the fighter gets to do that others don't unless they build into it specifically. But the fighter is also highly versatile. While many classes only know how to wear 1 or 2 types of armor, the fighter can wear light, medium, or heavy, depending on the player's choice. But you can also use a shield and both simple and martial weapons. This means you have a lot of choices, and you can make use of much more loot that you find out there in your travels. Fighters are meant to be on the front lines, taking the fight right to the enemy, but that does put them in harm's way, which is why they also have access at level 1 to an ability called Second Wind, which allows them to heal themselves in the middle of combat without having to rest and roll their hit die to heal. And another great thing about the fighter is that since they are so versatile, you basically never have to worry about an enemy being able to resist your attacks. If an enemy is resistant to bludgeoning weapons, you can simply swap to a slashing or piercing weapon since you know how to use a wide variety of weapons. This makes you much more of an asset in combat. So the fighter class, for all these reasons, definitely makes the list today. Next up, class number 3. I'm going to recommend for beginners if you like being a support player who helps out the others who may be more experienced than you are, you could choose to play as a cleric. What the heck is a cleric? Well, a cleric is a support class designed to heal and buff their allies. You aren't useless in combat though, as you have access to some pretty baller attacks, like for example the Guiding Bolt spell, which does very respectable damage on its own, but then it gives the next attacker advantage on their attacks against that same creature. Think of yourself as a warrior, priest, or priestess. You pledge fealty to a deity of some kind, and you fight and heal in their name. Clerics channel the power of that god in and outside of combat. They can provide guidance to their allies, helping them roll higher on their skill checks. They can cast healing spells to cure friends. They can recite incantations that gives allies extra armor, or they could even invoke the power of their deity to impose a curse upon their enemies. As you level up, you may even be able to create a mobile sanctuary which protects all of your allies inside of it from all sources of damage. You want to keep your friends alive, and you want to help them succeed at whatever they apply themselves to. That is the role of the cleric. Now, the only thing about the cleric that makes them slightly more complicated is the inclusion of spells. Spells are different from melee and ranged weapon attacks in that you have to prepare spells in advance that you want to have at the ready in combat. You also have a spell save DC. And it's actually quite simple, though. You literally just pick spells off the list that you want to use and have readied for the day, and that's it. And then you just look at your character sheet to see what your spell save DC is. You can then use these spells at your discretion based on how many spell slots you have. I'll do a full video breaking down spell casting, though, for those who might be confused by it all. But those are the 3 classes that I think are the best options for beginners in D&D. But I did say that there was an honorable mention, so let's move on to that one really quickly before we wrap up the video. Now, if you listened to all those recommendations and you decided that none of them were really quite speaking to you personally, then you might be a mage type. Maybe slinging spells imbued with elemental power to create fiery explosions, flashes of lightning, icy blasts of chilling air, or even the power to create clouds of flying daggers that constantly harass enemies caught in them. Maybe those things are more your speed. Well, the wizard is right up your alley, and it's my honorable mention for this list. As a wizard, you don't wear armor, not unless you level up later and choose to learn how to wear it. You wear cloth. You don't use anything but simple weapons, but they do have the option to summon powerful creatures from other planes to fight alongside them and take the damage from enemy attacks for them. But a wizard is like a collector of spells. Their entire purpose is to learn more and more and more spells. In fact, by the end of your leveling, you'll have about 30 different spells to choose from in combat at a time. It's wild. Wizards are gluttons for magical knowledge. The only challenge here is managing your spellbook, which is a bit of a rotating door, right? Transcribing spells you find in the wild into your spell book takes in-game time and currency. You also have to prepare and unprepare spells, which might change depending on your environment. But if you're an organized person in real life, you'll probably find this class both approachable and engaging for you and your analytical mind. That is why the wizard is an honorable mention. And so there you have it. Those are my top recommendations for classes for beginners in Dungeons & Dragons. Hopefully you found this discussion helpful and interesting. If you enjoyed the video, would you let me know by leaving a like on the videos? That's the best free way to support the content right here on YouTube, and consider subscribing for additional Dungeons & Dragons content. I'll definitely over time start to roll out detailed class breakdowns as well as we dive deep into each individual class and their subclasses as well. So stay tuned for that. We are counting down the days now until we kick off our brand new homebrewed campaign. So stay tuned for lore videos unpacking the new setting and the characters, as well as fully edited actual play sessions with me as the DM, complete with custom artwork and maps to help you visualize the locations and the story overall. If you'd like to help pitch in a modest tip to cover the cost of that custom artwork, you can check out the $6 tier of our Patreon page, where all of the earnings go directly to paying our artists for their time and expertise. And with that, I say, be warm and well fed, my friends, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.